your name, how do you spell it? And then also if you could say your title.
So my name is Jaime Smith. I am Executive Lead of Homelessness and Supportive Housing with the Department of Opportunities and Social Development.
Okay, so I think that this concept of supportive housing was foreign to a lot of Nova Scotians just a few years ago, but has become more familiar as we've seen some of the sites open, like the site on Cogswell Street, the one on Church Street in Dartmouth, the Overlook, the Bridge. So I wonder, is that model new since those sites opened, or was it being used prior to those locations?
So supportive housing has been around in Nova Scotia for quite some time, and when the Supportive Housing Action Plan came out in 2022, it actually is able to build on the almost 400 units that were already here. And supportive housing, you've mentioned a few different locations, including the Bridge. The Bridge is actually not supportive housing. It is a transitional shelter space with health integrated supports. So I do want to make that clarification because that is a common misconception. Shelters are a different model, and they do have different expectations and different indicators of success than what we see in the supportive housing space. So I just want to make sure that we're talking about the same things.
Is there an umbrella term that would capture what the Bridge does as well as support other supportive housing sites?
So we would put all of that under a continuum of homelessness and supportive housing. So we can think about a continuum helps us describe the various options and choices that we do have for folks experiencing homelessness. We're very fortunate that when the crisis was at its peak, and there still is a crisis in homelessness in Nova Scotia and other parts of the country and around the world right now as well. But we were trying to get things online as quickly as possible, and we had a very swift response. There have been over 700 supportive housing units that have been developed in the province in that time. We also now have 590 shelter sites or shelter beds across the province. And we also have a number of different transitional shelter units. So there are different definitions for different choices and options that people have in that spectrum of option. So it's inclusive of everything from those shelter units, that is a one-bed overnight stay perhaps, to a permanent housing solution that is supportive housing.
When was the peak of this homelessness crisis?
It depends. Just a second. I'm going to start again on that one.
Yeah, I'll ask you the question again because
Sure.
Because you alluded to the peak, that there was, there's real concerted effort to getting more units online when we were at the peak of the crisis. So I just want to make sure I understand, when was that peak that you're referring to?
I'm referring to a peak when we saw more people experiencing homelessness unsheltered in the province. I think it was most visible in HRM at the time, coming through COVID into 2021-22, where we had a couple of hundred people surviving unsheltered in various locations throughout the province, but especially that we would see visibly within the Halifax-Dartmouth area. What we have seen now, though, is an increase in the numbers of homelessness as we're being reported through the by name list and HIFAS with their partners at the Affordable Housing Association of Nova Scotia. However, the number of people who are unsheltered has been reduced, and we are seeing more people, especially in the past 6 months or so, who are getting access to permanent housing.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so we're talking more about like the peak of the tent encampments.
The peak of tent encampments, and we know that the need is ongoing, and we've been very fortunate to work with partners, with municipalities, with the federal government, with various service providers and community-based organizations across the province, so that we have a clear understanding of who is experiencing unsheltered homelessness, what are the various forms of unsheltered homelessness and those experiencing homelessness, who are those individuals, where are they, and with an investment in outreach services in the past couple of years as well, there's more access for people to understand what options might be available to them.
You said that before some of the newer supportive housing sites opened up, there were already 400 in existence. Were those congregate supportive housing sites, or would those have been scattered throughout the province?
Those would have been scattered throughout the province.
Okay, and the 700 new units that were developed, are those all within the congregate sites?
Those are also scattered across the province. So we have many different options. So we've got a housing continuum that I've talked about in terms of that experience from coming into a shelter bed through transitional sheltering, shelter villages, and supportive housing. But in supportive housing, we also do have options in those spaces as well. So we have partners like Open Arms that's providing services in the Valley, for example, and one of their options is a master lease program for folks who have higher acuity needs, and those are scattered site master lease programs where they're getting the wraparound supports through Open Arms and other community-based partners, and they have that permanent tenancy within that apartment space. We also have wonderful options like the Rose, which is led through ADSM for women and girls. And the Rose is a beautiful example of where various government departments and the service provider came together to provide 18 units and soon opening up to 24 for families with children who require that additional wraparound support. And we have many other options with folks across the province, extending from Sydney all the way down through the Valley and other locations as well.
So I wonder if we could sort of take a 10,000-foot view of this. What I think, and tell me if this is not a fair characterization, but this like really significant build out of supportive housing options that has happened over the last few years to address that peak of tent encampment, like unhoused homelessness that was happening. So if we take just a broad view of that effort over the last few years, generally speaking, how do you think it has gone?
I think it's going incredibly well, and we are learning a lot at the same time. So in Nova Scotia, we're very fortunate. It's a special place. Communities and people in the province want to take care of the neighbors and people who also live in those communities. So when the Supportive Housing Action Plan came online, there were already many community-based partners who were invested in supporting people experiencing homelessness in their local communities. So we were able to build partnerships, build upon those assets, and mobilize really quickly to ensure that people would have not only shelter supports available, but to have this more permanent supportive housing that was in place. So at this point in time, we're exceeding the targets that had been set out in the Supportive Housing Action Plan. We're taking time over the last couple of months to be connecting with partners and continuing to do that work to understand what's working well, where people and organizations seeing some challenges, and what might we be thinking about doing next in terms of ensuring that the supportive housing is there. It's in the right place at the right opportunity and providing the right supports for people to access that kind of housing support.
There have been issues at some of these sites with criminal activity, community safety concerns. Do you think those issues are inevitable when you're using this congregate supportive housing model, or is there a way that you could completely mitigate those problems?
So I think with any community, with any congregate setting, there are inevitably challenges that arise, and that also arise within the supportive housing space. So we have congregate living settings. We also have more dispersed settings, as I've mentioned, through our master lease programs with some of our partners. And sometimes you do see circumstances arise where our partners are engaging with local police services, they're engaging with their local community, and they're ensuring that people have the right services and supports in place so that they can mitigate the challenges that they're experiencing. And I don't think that's very much unlike most other communities and some of the challenges that they might face. I think where we're really fortunate within the supportive housing and homelessness sector is that there are lots of really strong partnerships that are being built or that are existing between those service providers, government partners, as well as those additional supports that might be required in those circumstances.
What do you think has been working well that Opportunities in Social Development has been doing to address those problems around community safety and criminal activity?
So we are working really closely with HRM, for example, and connecting, sometimes almost daily around issues that are arising, ensuring that folks at their outreach teams, for example, might be engaging with, have a good understanding and knowledge of the supports and services that are in place. And we're continuing to build those relationships in communities right across the province. I think a few years ago, and this would have been before myself joining the department, there would have been an understanding that homelessness was more of an urban issue. What we have seen since COVID is that homelessness is an issue. It's more visible in communities across the province. Nova Scotia isn't unlike other jurisdictions where they're also seeing these kinds of challenges. So we're very fortunate that we can build those relationships, that we have service providers, those community-based organizations who are located in their local communities. They are the boots on the ground, engaging in the work, and they're building those relationships from the ground up. And we're able to be there at a systems level to help them navigate through those spaces and ensure that we have the services and supports in the right place for the people who need it the most.
This sounds like sort of a immediate response, working with HRM, working with your service providers. Is there a long-term outlook for these congregate supportive housing sites where they might be decommissioned, for lack of a better word, and you have folks dispersed more throughout the community to overcome those challenges with a congregate setting?
So I think, again, it really, when you speak to congregate settings, evidence would tell us that units of 12 to 15 are very appropriate, for example, for folks experiencing, I'm going to scratch this part if I can.
I'm not just start that again?
Yeah, I'm just going to, could you ask the question again? Because I don't think I want to go too in the weeds on that one just yet. I think I need to
I liked where you were going. That was really interesting, that 12 to 15 is very appropriate. But I'll ask the question again. You decide how far you want to go into it.
Sure. Let me just think about how I'm going to frame that appropriately, because I think I know what you're getting at.
Yeah, okay. So I'll ask the question again.
Sure.
So you were talking about sort of day-to-day working with HRM, working with service providers to make sure that that things are operating smoothly. What is the long-term strategy for these congregate supportive housing sites? And is there an eye on decommissioning them, again, for want of a better word there, so that people are scattered more throughout communities and not living in congregate environments?
So again, I think it's really important to clarify what is supportive housing and what is not supportive housing. So spaces like the Bridge are not supportive housing. It is a transitional integrated health shelter option for folks experiencing homelessness, and it's not supportive housing. We see supportive housing in many different ways across the province, as I've mentioned as well, whether that's through master leases, which are often very scattered, but the congregate settings themselves vary in the number of units too. What we are learning is that depending on the acuity, and that can change day to day, or the complex needs of individuals who have experienced homelessness living in supportive housing, that the higher acuity those needs are, it tends to require a smaller number of units within that congregate living environment for the best outcomes for the people who are there. We've really focused on getting the units established, and we've been very successful in exceeding the timelines and targets under the Supportive Housing Action Plan to do so. And we are also trying to understand what those best options might look like in a next phase of the work.
What about the Cogswell and Church Street sites specifically? If I remember correctly, those were never meant to be long-term operations. What's the outlook for those two sites?
So we're currently looking at also the next phases of that work, and we always understood that those would, as you mentioned, not be a permanent solution. And we've recently changed service provider at those two sites. And we've also changed a focus to more transitional nature of supportive housing in those two sites, because as you mentioned, they're not meant for an individual to stay there in perpetuity for a permanent location, and ensuring that they do have the right services and supports in place so that they can find better options and get the supports that they need to be living the life that they choose and deserve.
Mm-hmm. I have heard it argued by some researchers that it is more cost effective to have people in scattered supportive housing than in congregate supportive housing. Is that something that you're familiar with, and is it something you agree with?
We are exploring all options around what the next phases of supportive housing would need to look like. And of course, we are looking at cost benefit analysis around that work too.
You mentioned earlier exceeding targets from the Supportive Housing Action Plan.
That's
what
right.
are those targets?
So the Supportive Housing Action Plan establishes a target of 1,586 units of supportive housing. And I'll have to get back to you on what the exact number is that we are supposed to meet this year, although I do know that we have exceeded that number. And we're currently at, I believe it's 1,153 units today. That I'll have Erica follow up with you on exactly what the targets are per year and where we do stand.
What other kind of metrics do you use for success beyond providing a certain number of units?
So we work very closely with the Affordable Housing Association of Nova Scotia, and they're responsible for the by name list and HIFIS, which helps us get a really clear understanding of the instance of homelessness within local communities. And we have to also understand that all of that information is self-reported, so there is always some bias that's brought into that data. So we do work closely with AHANS. We work closely with them to understand the quantitative or the number side of homelessness, as well as some of the qualitative information that's included. And we're always talking daily with service providers, with folks who are in outreach positions across the province, for example, to get the feedback and understanding the stories of people who are experiencing homelessness. Because as much as homelessness is a very complex issue, homelessness also really varies depending upon the individual or family who is experiencing that instance of homelessness. And we need to also ensure that at a systems level, with the Department of Opportunities and Social Development, we understand what's happening within the system and the number of people, for example, who are experiencing that, but also at an individual level and with our service providers, understanding the stories of success and the humanity that exists within the space of homelessness and what that means for people when they do get that opportunity to be in supportive housing.
I think that I have a better understanding now of supportive housing and sort of where it's at, what the outlook is. Is there anything else you think is important to add?
Just give me one moment for that one.
Yep.
I'm going to see if there's anything, Aaron, that I wanted to mention that I didn't get to. I think there is. So maybe not so much in terms of supportive housing, but as we think about homelessness in the context of Nova Scotia, we are looking at a goal of functional zero homelessness. So that means that experiences of homelessness are very brief, that there's intervention and that there's a non-recurring experience of homelessness. We did learn in the point in time count that most recently, the chronicity of homelessness, or folks are experiencing homelessness for a longer duration. And we know that trauma increases with, and symptoms of trauma increase with those instances of homelessness. So ensuring that we have the right supportive housing in place in communities across the province where people want to be and where they live is really critical part of ensuring that we are growing healthier communities here as well.
Thanks so much, Jaime. I really appreciate your time.
Thanks so much.